Now, joining me, Ben Wikler, Washington director of MoveOn.org and host of The Good Fight. You see that hip kind of slingshot behind Ben right there. And slingshot free, but always ready with verbal quips and his sling and arrows of snappy comments. Our good friend Javier Manjarres, managing editor of the Shark Tank political blog. And Javier, I'll begin with you and this stark criticism of Dick Durbin directed toward the president. Is that an acknowledgement by Democratic Senator Durbin that his party and his president and his side faces an uphill battle in the upcoming midterms?
Well, absolutely. Look, you're talking about Dick Durbin, one of the most liberal and one of President Obama's henchmen in the Senate, who's countering the president. Look, Durbin is a very smart character, and so is everyone else in the Democrat. They know that President Obama's actions or inactions in the Middle East and with his failed foreign policy are going to hurt all Democrats on the ticket this election and in subsequent elections. Now, again, because of the failed foreign policy, you're going to have all these Democrats moving away from the president again. And even if the president does something spectacular, even if his newfound war on terror against ISIS is somewhat in the next, let's say, several months, they show a couple of wins, if you would, it's not going to help the Democrats whatsoever. They're moving away from the president as they would because, again, this is all they can do right now. It's a lose-lose for the president and the Democrats, this foreign policy of his.
So Ben, maybe not specifically with Dick Durbin, but you take a look at these campaigns for the Senate, whether it's Allison Lundergan Grimes in Kentucky or incumbent Senator Kay Hagan in North Carolina, you've got Democrat candidates doing their best to separate from President Obama.
What's interesting to me looking at this Senate race and Senate races, and looking at the situation right now in Iraq and Syria, is that this is one of the few examples I can remember in recent memory when the old adage of politics stopping at the water's edge seems to largely actually be happening. If you look at polls, it's statistically identical, the level of support for the president's policy between Republicans and Democrats. There are a lot of people that support the president, and frankly, there are people on both sides of the aisle who are raising justified questions and concerns about exactly where this is going and how this should work out. We haven't had the kind of full debate that we need in Congress and as a country to figure out what our policy should be. And I think what you're hearing from people in both parties is a call for that debate to happen. Right now, this is not a political issue, and frankly, that's good, because the real question is how to get this policy right.
Well, go ahead, Javier.
It is a political issue. You can't say it isn't, because it's affecting the polls. Why do you think these Democrats in these states, these swing states as well, are moving away from the president? Because it's a political issue. It's going to affect them in this coming November.
We made mention of the New Hampshire Senate race. Former Massachusetts Senator, the Republican nominee in New Hampshire, Scott Brown, has started airing ads against the Democrat incumbent Jeanne Shaheen, saying that both Senator Shaheen and the president are really confused about the nature of the threat. So, Ben, mindful of that, even with what you're basically talking about, a kind of statistical neutrality, there has to be a reason why Scott Brown is using that. He has to see something in the polling that would indicate these kind of spots would work for him against Jeanne Shaheen.
I think what we're seeing from Scott Brown is a recognition that his other attacks on Jeanne Shaheen aren't working. He's still behind, and he's one of the most recognized Senate challengers in the nation. He was elected in Massachusetts, and then he was thrown out in Massachusetts. Now he moves to New Hampshire, and he's still several points behind Jeanne Shaheen in this race. If there were really such a swing towards the Republicans, if there was really such outrage, about any of these policies, you'd think he'd be pulling ahead by now. I think he's grasping at straws.
Well, Javier, challengers typically don't really close in until the final weeks of the campaign, do they? You've had to be in contact with some of Brown's people. They must feel pretty good about remaining within striking distance of the incumbent Shaheen, do they not?
Look, whether he's down by 5 or 10 points, this is a topic you have to hit on. Shaheen is in line with the president when it comes to his foreign policy, so why not hit her, regardless if he's down, like I said, by 5 or 10 points? You have to hit her. This is politics. You have to go after those issues, even if he musters up a couple of points in his favor. Again, like what Ben said, he is behind in the polls, but again, this is a very liberal state, so to me, it's more of like a toss-up. See what happens the next couple of months, but who knows? Anything can happen. And again, I think it all's going to boil down to Obamacare at the very last hour.
Well, we'll see what happens there, but just one last note to Ben Wikler. Juan Williams had a column the other day in The Hill saying that national security issues are basically going to be the October surprise that will help President Obama and the Democrats. Ben, do you share Juan's optimism in that regard?
You know, I'm an optimist by nature, but I actually don't see foreign policy as an October surprise in this election. I think this is fundamentally a debate about what our foreign policy should be, where everyone's trying to figure that out. We're trying to have that conversation as a nation. I think the election will be decided, as Javier said, on the question of whether to take away health insurance for millions of people and block access to birth control for women. These domestic issues in our polling are by far the most salient in this election. And I think what we're seeing with ISIS, with Syria and Iraq, is a question about whether the United States policy will actually make us safer and what to do next. That's the discussion we need to have. That's a policy debate. I think for the politics right now, this is still a domestic midterm election, and the people on the ballot are senators, not the president.
So a moment of unanimity.
Well,
go ahead, Javier.
Well, I don't completely disagree with Ben as far and I do and agree. The October surprise, we don't know what October.
Disagree on something?
The October surprise is not. We don't know what October surprise is going to be. For all we know, that God forbid there's a terrorist attack in the homeland, and we in October, and guess what? How are we going to respond to it? How Obama responds to it could make or break this election for the Democrats. Well, it's already broke for the Democrats, but it could make it worse or better for them.
Well, God forbid any type of attack on the homeland. Right. I know we're united in that. None of us want to see anything like that. So you gentlemen agree that ultimately the midterms will be decided on domestic issues and the economy, at least as things look now 40 days out. But looking ahead to 2016, the presidential race, foreign policy will obviously play a role there. And should Hillary Clinton become the Democratic nominee for president, well, the Washington Post of all publications has weighed in. And here is what the Post has to say. Clinton is faced again with problems in Iraq and her role in shaping U.S. policy in the region. The airstrikes on the Islamic State group have inflamed the Democratic left, adding another potential line of attack against her if she decides to run for the White House. So, Ben, the question becomes this: is Hillary too hawkish for the base of the Democratic Party?
You know, JD, anyone who's thinking about seeking the Democratic nomination for president in 2016 needs to think long and hard before embracing the kinds of neocon hawkish policies that got the United States into this Iraq mess in the first place in 2003. That's the question facing any Democrat who might be running for president in 2016, and I hope they're listening to this right now and really taking a gut check.
Or what Ben is saying is embracing President Obama's current foreign policy, which he happens to be mimicking President Bush of 2003. But again,
you know, the Dick Cheney and the folks who loved the first Iraq War are now calling for a massive influx of ground troops into Iraq and Syria.
But Hillary Clinton also supported it. Bill Clinton also supported the 2003 Gulf War. They all did. They all called for it.
Obama said running in 2008, which is the United States should not get involved in stupid wars.
Well, now, wait a minute. It is kind of curious, Ben, that while you seem to offer a distinction without a difference, because the common denominator seems to be attack George W. Bush. He's been away a long time. Yeah. Javier, are the guys on the left going to be able to keep attacking George W. Bush for years to come, kind of like they did with Herbert Hoover in the Great Depression?
Listen,
we've got a minute left. You got 30 seconds to answer, Javier.
That's their ace in the hole. That's all they can revert back to. When they have no argument like the Democrat Party has when it comes to foreign policy, they revert back to that. But I think the biggest issue for Hillary Clinton moving forward in 2016 will be her failure in Benghazi, and people are going to want to know exactly what she knew and when she knew it.
All right, Ben, here's your chance. You want to go after George W. or Herbert Hoover, or you've got 15 seconds. Go ahead, Ben.
I think the Republicans had a great time. They're still attacking Jimmy Carter, and they would attack Franklin Delano Roosevelt if Social Security weren't so overwhelmingly popular with the American public. America has a long history. These battles will not be decided overnight, but I can tell you this: embracing George W. Bush's legacy is not a win for Democrats or for anybody.
All right, on that note, we will thank you both. Javier Manjarres in our Newsmax newsroom. Ben Wikler in Washington, D.C. Always good to have a healthy exchange of ideas and thoughts and opinions between right and left. There is more to come as we continue this Thursday edition of America's Forum. I'll be back right after this.